We're joined once again by former CIA Field Operations Officer Jack Rice, currently the host of Live in Washington with Jack Rice on Air America Radio. Jack, good evening.
Great to be with you.
Let's start with the NBC report tonight that a single letter dropped from the man's name prevented the U.S. from revoking his visa, presumably. How crazy is this that, A, we don't have people in these roles who can spell or, try alternate spellings, etc., be a little creative on it, and B, that the government does not have this function that Google has, the capacity to ask, did you mean Abdul Muttalib?
Yeah, it makes me wonder how we're spelling Osama bin Laden. I wonder if we have his address someplace in Karachi. We've just never spelled it right. Is it with an O or with a U? Or have they transposed letters? This is a perfect example, by the way, of some of the systemic problems that we have. The fact that we have spent $1 trillion in this transformation of the government and the world, frankly, and we still can't get something so simple done. I feel like I need to get my 12-year-old sent down to Langley, sent over to the National Counterterrorist Center and say, this is what you should do. And that's a frightening prospect.
Yeah, it's also literally one of the plot fulcrums from Terry Gilliam's movie from 20-odd years ago, Brazil, a one-letter difference, and they go out and get the wrong guy and accuse him of being a terrorist. So again,
perfect.
A life imitating art in a horrible way. This other part of the story, the Washington Post report today, that Mr. Bush's reforms of the intelligence system might not have changed things for the better ultimately. There was a 2005 essay from the man who now leads and is in charge of this massive terrorist database, and he wrote, "Are we on the road to fixing intelligence or are we at risk of making it worse? In truth, either outcome is entirely possible." Has this vast amount of raw data the U.S. has swept up, some of it legally and a lot more illegally, made it more difficult to make use of it? And can today's changes change this?
Well, the Bush team has made it much worse. I mean, they've actually had a lot of problems here, and they've caused a lot of these. A perfect example of this is they weren't as concerned about quality. Hence, that's the reason they were willing to torture somebody by waterboarding them 183 times in a month. I mean, it's a perfect example. If you don't get good in, garbage out, you still have that problem. But then we couple that with the inability to analyze it and synthesize it, so you have garbage in, and then you confuse it, and you still can't put it together. And so you get nothing.
And that essay that I just quoted also says that reform severed the collection of the data from the analysis of the data. And go into a little more depth about why that's a problem, and again, is there a way to address that quickly?
Absolutely. This was the organizational structure. Again, the CIA used to do a lot of its own analysis, so they would take the information from the field. As a field operative, I would bring that in. Somebody would take that and analyze it. Then what they did after 9/11 is they started the Director of National Intelligence and the National Counterterrorism Center. They would take that information from them and then move it to another place. The problem with that sometimes is you may not get all of the context of that initial information, so they only get pieces of it. When you break this up into so many different moving parts, and there are already incredible numbers of moving parts already, you sort of misunderstand how the entire process works. And so now they're having to cobble it all back together and try to come up with an answer, and they're still failing at that.
All right, put on your field operations officer hat one last time and tell me what you would have thought from that perspective of Mr. Obama's point that a perfect intelligence might not still discover every would-be bomber.
Well, I love the fact that this man is a realist, because you can't necessarily grab everything. There are human beings involved. You may simply not have the be available. And by the way, this highlights the broadest question of all. The person who gets recruited who wasn't tied to terrorism in the past. You get a 23-year-old Nigerian, and if you didn't have anything else that had touched this, imagine how you deal with that. And that's the biggest problem we face in the future, is this radicalization issue, and we have to deal with that.
Jack Rice, formerly of the CIA, now of Air America. Thanks again, Jack.
Thank you very much.